sure, but I remember it.
So yes, tonight is about the road to reform, Pakatan Rakyat in Selangor, which I'll talk about in a bit, but I'd like to stress before that Pakatan Rakyat just happened to be the political coalition that came along at the right time. My point is this, that the reason change came about in the first place was primarily due to the collective voice of the people. It is this third force, the People's Court, as so aptly pointed out in one of the chapters, which I hope you will read, that can and should claim victory to any transformation occurring in Selangor at present and for Malaysia in the future. But back to the book. As mentioned in the introduction, why did this book come about in the first place? To be honest, it was end of last year, and then my colleagues and I figured out that, hey, March 8, 2010 was just around the corner, and many people were going to ask us what we did over the last 2 years. So that was the inception of the idea of the book. Apart from compiling all the state's policies into a little booklet, which we also did, we thought we'd do an exciting project with a unique twist. What was this twist? You know, on one hand, while we wanted to have a record of all our successes, achievements, and also shortfalls over the last 2 years, it would seem pretty propagandish, so to speak, to spew out lists of what we had done. Instead, what we did was we invited 22 contributors to give their independent views of the Pakatan's reform agenda over a range of topics. All of them, if you have flipped through the book over the last half an hour, are prolific thought leaders, opinion shapers in society, a mix of academics, practitioners, and opinion shapers, and all with good expertise in their respective fields. This collection of essays is therefore a comprehensive review of all the important policy areas that Selangor government has grappled with over the last 2 years. Now, I think it's important to point out here that I was interviewed over the BFM radio station over the last few days, and they asked, isn't this just a PR tool for you? Isn't this just a public relations campaign? I said yes, while it is precisely a way in which the Selangor government can engage with the people, it is how we relate to the public, but importantly, the authors were all given the independence and intellectual freedom to write, which to us was considered as constructive criticism of the situation in Selangor. We did not want to limit the authors, dictate their premises upon which they could write, and if they're here, you can ask them. They would tell you that most of their criticisms, as written, are in the book. So this reflects and affirms a commitment, which I say in the introduction, towards independence, the ability to engage in honest and genuine self-reflection and self-criticism. If we were not willing to be honest about our errors, we would just be like the government that we toppled. So being aware of the issues gives us a very clear direction to the solutions needed to resolve those problems. And as we all know, reform is a gargantuan task. Those of us who follow news and politics closely will know that this so-called road to reform is surely not an easy one. Right now, news of a certain party elections will be spewed on the front page of a particular mainstream newspaper. How does this bode for the road to reform? I think these are questions that we're going to ask ourselves. But again, it is precisely through these independent reviewers' perspectives that we as a government can then identify existing gaps where expectations are still yet unfulfilled, for us to weigh the recommendations that have been put forth in the book and take action on the areas of concern. So the book, finally talking about it, is organized into 4 different sections, namely politics, economics, social, and cultural issues. The book is written in a semi-academic style, with the public as its intended audience. The issues brought up within these sections, of course, invariably overlap. You can't really separate governance from politics. And so much of economic, social, and cultural life actually is attached to political strings in the country, although this ought not to be the case. Also, if you have the book in your hand, I'd like to point out what's interesting, that the words occurring the most number of times in the index at the back of the book are not Pakatan Rakyat or even DAP, PKR, PAS. The words occurring most number of times in the book are actually words like transparency, accountability, and governance. I think this is very refreshing because it shows just how much importance is being placed on such values, keeping us as the government on our toes. So these are indicators of the very high expectation levels that people have now learned to keep their governments both at state and federal level. And our elected representatives, of course. There are many here today. You can interact with them later. I'll just touch on one issue. I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but this is one issue that was prevalent throughout the 22 chapters of the book. It's on federal-state relations. Federalism is an issue that cannot be divorced from any of the issues that we are facing today. Sometime this year, for example, we sponsored the Bar Council's My Constitution campaign on federal-state relations because we felt it was important to understand, and for the public to understand, the areas of jurisdiction between the federal and the state governments. There are only certain areas in which we have jurisdiction over, which many people still have not come to terms with. How then do we make sense of our policies? How then do we implement those programs based on such a centralized federal government, so to speak? Pakatan offered the people a glimpse of hope, if we can remember how we felt 2.5 years ago. Offered the people a glimpse of hope that people in my generation and my children and my grandchildren would grow up feeling like they belonged to our country, Malaysia, a nation in which systematic prejudice does not exist, where public funds are not pocketed for private use, where the laws protect instead of terrorize, where government supports instead of dictates. And if only it were as easy as waving a magic wand in the air and saying, yes, we will reform in this very instant. But as we in government know, it is really not easy. It is not easy. This has been my humble attempt of spreading ideas to different nations. I imagine and I hope that this book can be used for young people who are sitting huddled in corners, discussing it in London, in New York, in Sydney, all across the world. Perhaps some of you can watch this on YouTube tonight or tomorrow after it's uploaded. I think things are changing, and we want the young generation to have an opportunity to participate, to be empowered in a government that is not top-down, but one that is bottom-up. Incidentally, since I'm talking about young people, I'll tell you a story. When we were choosing the book covers for this particular book, there were 3 samples that were sent out. And out of the 3, I chose 2 to send round to ask for opinions. Did they like cover A or did they like cover B? I had a little poll going on, and I hope those of you who responded are not offended if I say that those who preferred this particular cover were those that belonged in the slightly younger generation. So you know who you are, I won't say it. But I think this demonstrates and reflects very well the ethos behind what this government is attempting to do. We're trying to inject ideas of hope, of innovation, of creativity into the young who before this had never had the opportunity to be part of national development and national growth. So the patriotism for many young people began first in the first wave from 1997-98, but the second wave in 2008. I hope this continues to flourish despite the many disillusionments faced ever so often.